Erdoğan bared his teeth. Putin is forced to pay for everything, in the literal sense of the word. Sanctions have finished off Russia. Rosatom is on the verge of bankruptcy. The construction project of the century has been frozen. Putin betrayed Trump. Europe has exposed the Kremlin's games. Russia is a raw materials appendage of China. Everyone is using Putin despite the parade and the red carpet. I'll tell you all the details in just a moment. Greetings, this is Ukraine Today. I am Victoria Panchenko, bringing you the latest events. A cruel irony of fate. Now Putin pays tribute not only to Chechnya, but also to Turkey. Erdoğan bared his teeth, and now payments for Russian gas will remain in Turkey. According to Erdoğan, the money for Russian gas will be directed towards the construction of the nuclear power plant that Rosatom has been building in Turkey since 2018.
We have successfully completed the testing phase of the clearing mechanism, which will allow us to meet the financial needs of the nuclear power plant under construction using gas payments.
Oh, what happened to Rosatom, the richest enterprise of all time and all peoples? Oh, the horror. The company is unable to independently pay for the construction of the nuclear power plant, which is estimated at $20 billion. Could it be that Rosatom is bankrupt? As it turned out, due to sanctions, the state nuclear corporation had its funds blocked in its accounts. As a result, in the summer, the builders of Akuyu even organized a mass protest due to delayed payments. Initially, the launch of the first power unit of the nuclear power plant was planned for 2023. But after the German company Siemens refused to supply equipment for the project due to sanctions, the completion of construction was postponed to 2025 and then even further to 2026. Now even that deadline is in question. Moreover, Rosatom is negotiating the sale of 49% of the shares of the Akuyu nuclear power plant to Turkish and foreign investors. There you have the effect of sanctions. Putin's empire is slowly but surely crumbling, while Erdoğan deserves a standing ovation. As the saying goes, two birds with one stone, both gas and the nuclear power plant for Turkey are being paid for by the Kremlin. Moreover, the president of Turkey made another unexpected statement. The president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, and the Russian dictator, Vladimir Putin, are supposedly not yet ready for a face-to-face meeting. He said this in a conversation with journalists on board a plane while returning from China, where he had met with the Kremlin chief, Vladimir Putin. Ankara hopes that the path to peace in Ukraine remains open.
In my bilateral meeting with Russian President Vladimir Putin, we discussed what could be done to end the war between Ukraine and Russia with a just peace. From the very beginning, we have always considered the possibility of ending the war between Ukraine and Russia through negotiations. The negotiations that took place in Istanbul are the clearest proof that this path remains open.
Although quite recently the situation looked a bit different, and there were even rumors that Erdoğan had pressured Putin. Supposedly, the Russian dictator backed down and was ready to abandon his intentions regarding Kherson and Zaporizhia.
Previously, the Russians insisted on full control over 4 regions. Now they have abandoned this, limiting themselves to holding the line of contact except for one place, the Donetsk region. Taking all this into account, we can conclude that we are optimistic about peace.
The leaders of the EU countries, however, were much less optimistic. At a joint press conference with the president of France, the German chancellor stated that it is now clear that Putin has betrayed Trump. No meeting between Zelensky and Putin is expected. This statement was made after yet another massive attack by the occupiers on Kyiv.
Once again, Russia has shown its true face. It is clear that the meeting between Putin and Zelensky, which was arranged by US President Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin in Washington last week, will not take place.
Also just recently, the leader of Turkey shocked the entire world with a new statement. Turkey has started building bomb shelters. Erdoğan has approved a project to build shelters in at least 80 provinces. This is to minimize the number of casualties in the event of hostilities or nuclear strikes. Could it be that Turkey and other countries have started preparing for war? And who might become the next victim of Putin's aggression? More details are coming up in the report. Erdoğan is preparing for war. Bomb shelters across the country. Amid rising tensions in the region, Turkey has launched a large-scale project to build modern bomb shelters aimed at protecting the civilian population. According to the decision made at the cabinet meeting, fortified structures will be built in all provinces of the country, capable of protecting people in the event of war, terrorist attacks, or natural disasters. The initiative has already sparked widespread public reaction. In developing the project, special attention was paid to studying the experience of other countries. Israel for building bomb shelters, Japan for earthquake protection, and Switzerland for civil defense. The shelters are planned to be equipped with modern ventilation, water supply, and communication systems to ensure comfort and safety for people even during prolonged emergencies. According to Turkish media, construction work has already begun in several key cities, including the capital Ankara. The new facilities will be compact yet sturdy structures located near residential areas so that citizens can reach them as quickly as possible. Turkey is not the only country preparing for war. In 2025, the Baltics remain one of the key regions on the map of international political security. The constant threat from Russia forces the Baltic countries and their NATO partners to take measures to strengthen their defensive capabilities. The German foreign minister stated that the security of the Baltics and Germany is inseparable. The countries will strengthen cooperation to counter both traditional and non-traditional attacks from Russia. Tensions have risen not only in the Baltic countries. On Thursday, proposals were submitted to the Finnish parliament to raise the maximum age for reservists from 60 to 65 years.
The newly established upper age limit will now apply to all individuals conscripted into service who were born in the year 1966 or any subsequent year thereafter.
The Finnish government expects that if the corresponding law is adopted, the number of reservists will increase by 125,000 within 5 years, reaching 1 million. And the new NATO Supreme Allied Commander in Europe has even stated that Europe and the US must actively prepare for a future war against China and Russia. According to him, the leader of the PRC is planning to attack Taiwan and will force Russia to attack NATO. In his opinion, the EU countries and the US have a maximum of 2.5 years to prepare for war against Russia and China. He specified that the year of major crisis will be 2027. And these fears are being fueled by the planned joint Russian-Belarusian maneuvers Zapad 2025, scheduled for September. Importantly, these exercises are a direct analog of the Zapad 2021 maneuvers, after which the full-scale invasion of Ukraine began. At the beginning of August, the first trains carrying Russian divisions had already started arriving at Belarusian training grounds. In the context of a major war, these exercises are also seen as an immediate or future threat both to Ukraine and to the Baltic states, as well as the entire eastern flank of NATO. Against this backdrop, the Ukrainian leadership states that Russia is preparing new offensive actions in the coming months. Despite peace negotiations, Moscow and Minsk began preparing for these exercises at the start of the year. At that time, it was announced that the number of troops involved would exceed 13,000. But later, the Belarusian Minister of Defense said that in order to reduce tensions, Zapad 2025 would be scaled down and even moved deeper into the country, farther from the borders. Lukashenko has also repeatedly assured that the upcoming exercises pose no threat to either Ukraine, the Baltic countries, or Poland. However, he said the same thing back in 2022. The exercises will be conducted under the pretext of readiness to repel a possible aggression against the Union state of Russia and Belarus. The maneuvers are planned to include countering airstrikes, defensive combat, air support for troops, and combating saboteurs. However, some plans already announced by the Belarusian Minister of Defense do not fit this supposedly defensive program, such as practicing the planning of the use of nuclear weapons and the medium-range Oreshnik missiles during Zapad 2025. An advisor to the leader of the Belarusian opposition, Sviatlana Tsikhanouskaya, emphasizes that the main factor in assessing the exercises will be the actual number of personnel involved.
They claim there will be 10 to 12,000 soldiers, but they always understate the numbers, and in reality, 5 to 6 times more arrive. That's how it was in 2022 when the full-scale invasion began.
One of the scenarios most frequently discussed by military experts in the context of the exercises is aggressive actions by Russians and Belarusians against the 3 Baltic states and Poland. It is worth noting the most well-known Article 5 of the NATO treaty states that an attack on one or more alliance countries will be considered an attack on all, and accordingly, all alliance members must stand against the aggressor. At the last NATO summit, Donald Trump reaffirmed his commitment to this article. Another scenario that since 2022 will inevitably accompany Russian military exercises in Belarus is the threat of a new offensive in the northern regions of Ukraine. Here too, everything will depend on the actual number of Russian military personnel involved in the exercises.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Kremlin propagandists have received new directives from above, along with fresh guidelines from Putin. The bunker dweller has decided whom he plans to attack next, and has already begun preparing the Russian population for another invasion. The Kremlin has set its sights on one of the NATO countries. Meanwhile, the NATO army has begun military exercises near the Russian border. Watch for all the details.
Kremlin propagandists have received new directives from above, along with fresh guidelines from Putin. It seems the bunker dweller has finally decided whom he wants to attack next and has already begun the ideological preparation of the population for another invasion. Now, the Kremlin has set its sights on one of the NATO countries, namely Estonia.
The Estonian Foreign Ministry has banned its citizens from traveling to Russia. Special attention should be paid to an article in the Polish publication Onet, which states that Estonia is ready to launch a preemptive strike against Russia. Estonia against Russia.
And even though Estonia is 300 times smaller than Russia, and it seems that even the Kremlin propagandists themselves don't take such a scenario seriously on their broadcasts, an order is an order, which means the population of Eretria needs to be actively prepared for a new military conflict.
Estonia plans to increase its military spending to 5.4% of GDP within 4 years. And right now, Estonia is already strengthening its border with our country. The federal authorities are erecting barriers along more than 300 kilometers. The civilian population is preparing for a hypothetical conflict with Moscow. People in the border regions are building personal underground bunkers in case of nuclear war and joining the so-called Defense League in case a conventional war breaks out.
And this is absolutely true. Estonia is preparing not to attack but to defend itself from Putin, especially since the Russian Foreign Ministry officially considers the Baltics a potential zone for another conflict.
The Journal of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, International Affairs, published an article about the Baltic Sea, in which it suggested considering it a potential theater of military operations.
This is a specific operation by Russian special services aimed at destabilizing the situation in our country. We are constantly experiencing various provocations directed at us. This is ongoing and we are constantly prepared for more serious provocations and aggression. And as they say, we are waiting for it. In other words, we are ready for this and ready to defend ourselves.
And with each passing day, there are more and more Russian provocations at the border with Estonia. We're talking about cyber attacks and mysterious jamming of satellite signals. The Kremlin doesn't hesitate to use its reconnaissance drones on the territory of a NATO country. Meanwhile, official Tallinn is already actively preparing to repel potential Russian occupiers. They are increasing defense spending, conducting exercises, and hastily mining their borders with Russia in case of a military invasion.
Russia does not choose its means in this brutal war it is waging. It violates all sorts of agreements it itself has joined. First and foremost, we must focus on how to protect our country, NATO, and the EU. Estonia will, without a doubt, approach this very responsibly.
In Estonia, the current and prevailing trend is precisely that we have come to fully realize. And regrettably, I must emphatically stress this point, especially in the aftermath of President Donald Trump's ascension to the esteemed White House, that we are indeed compelled to comprehensively prepare for and effectively deal with any potential and significant aggression emanating from the Russian Federation entirely on our own, without external assistance or intervention. So, right now, we are putting a lot of effort into being ready to defend ourselves, to protect ourselves independently.
And this is completely at odds with the Kremlin's plans. As military analysts explain, given the pace at which the defensive line is being built in Estonia and the endless series of failures suffered by the Russian army in the war in Ukraine, Putin simply does not have the resources or means to open a full-fledged second front. Which means there is only one scenario left, a war of information primarily aimed at the Russian-speaking population of the Baltic countries.
So, the largest group is those who are ready for all these challenges and support any government initiatives to strengthen defense capabilities. The second group, which unfortunately is also not small in our country, I don't even know what to call them. Vatniks, Putinists, Russian speakers, the fifth column. Well, there are plenty of names. So this is a distinct group of people who, while the first group is diligently preparing to actively fight back in clear anticipation of potential aggression, this second, entirely different group is patiently waiting for Vladimir Putin to send in his formidable troops to finally liberate them and utterly destroy this damned Estonia, because with every fiber of their very being, they profoundly hate Estonia. Estonia as a state, Estonia as a culture, Estonia as a language, and our entire way of life. They simply hate it and can't wait for Putin to give them the order to start wreaking havoc here.
Relying on such supporters of the Russian world, Putin is planning to invade a neighboring country. That is precisely why analysts believe the bunker dweller chose comparatively small Estonia as a potential victim. With a population of less than 1.4 million people, small Russian sabotage groups, under the right circumstances, and with the support of Estonia's Russian-speaking population, could try to repeat in Tallinn the scenario of the Crimea and Donbas takeover as it happened in 2014.
Small groups of unidentified men without insignia seize, as per the classic scenario, the post office, telephone exchange, telegraph, ATM, electronics store, liquor store, just as we saw in Donetsk, Luhansk, and Crimea. And after that, the creation of some sort of territorial autonomy is proclaimed. The local population cheers and supports it enthusiastically. Tanks are brought in, and that's it. It's now a sovereign republic that asks Putin to annex them. So, once again, in Donetsk, we saw a small number of genuinely pro-Russian citizens who, in a situation of government paralysis and indecision, managed to do what they could. They organized barricades, seized district police stations, and gained access to firearms. And it really was an avalanche-like movement that was almost impossible to stop, even with the use of the army.
This is exactly the kind of scenario that Russian propagandists actively discuss on their television broadcasts. According to their scare stories, Estonia wouldn't last even a few days, and the North Atlantic Alliance wouldn't have time to react before Russian tanks are supposedly under the windows of all the major cities in Europe.
And after that, it's Paris, Berlin, and on the ruins of Washington, we'll write our modest names. So that's basically the mood.
But all these wet dreams of Putin and his propagandists are never going to come true. According to analysts, instead of swallowing Estonia, the Kremlin will break its teeth on it. No matter how many supporters of the Russian world live in the Baltic countries, all of them support Putin from the comfort of their own homes, with warm apartments, running water and heating, good pensions, and all the other benefits of life in Europe. And Estonia is no exception here.
This country ranks 10th in the world for quality of life, 6th for economic freedom, and 12th in the Corruption Perceptions Index, while Russia, by the way, is ranked 141st. It holds first place in Europe for the quality of school education and 4th in the world. This country is constantly at the top of all sorts of other rankings as well. For example, it has the highest number of startups in Europe.
And it's unlikely that even the most ardent supporters of the Russian world would want to trade all of this for life in Russia, with its corruption, unemployment, and Putin's total rule.
By the way, things aren't exactly rosy between Russia and China either. An invitation to the parade and a red carpet are all well and good, of course. But once again, it all comes down to money. Due to sanctions, a Chinese bank has stopped accepting payments from Russia. By the way, this is one of the key banks for small and medium-sized businesses, the Bank of China. So the situation is more than serious. Payments continued for a month after the restrictions were introduced, but at the end of August, the bank stopped accepting money. The EU imposed sanctions on the bank on July 19th for providing services related to crypto assets that support sanctions against Russia. The decision came into effect on August 9th. From that moment on, EU representatives and companies were prohibited from engaging in any transactions with the Chinese bank. Let me remind you that a SCO summit was held in Beijing, where Putin met with Xi to show what good friends they are. But it's obvious to everyone that China sees Russia merely as a source of raw materials and nothing more. What should we expect next? Watch right now.
At the Shanghai Cooperation Organization Summit in Beijing, Xi Jinping called on the leaders of more than 24 countries to use their collective economic influence to counter the West. At the same time, the head of China followed the example of the Russian dictator and also turned to his own alternative version of history, attempting to portray China's role in World War II as the foundation for a future multipolar world in which Beijing is assigned the role of leader in opposition to Washington.
We must actively advocate for an equal and truly orderly multipolar world, fostering inclusive economic globalization, and diligently promote the building of a more just and genuinely equitable system of global governance.
Among the participants of the SCO summit was also Putin. 4-day foreign visits are a rarity for him. The last one was in 2005 for the 60th anniversary session of the UN General Assembly. Experts believe that the length of this visit is meant to emphasize the closeness between Moscow and Beijing.
This organization, and especially at this summit, is gradually turning into an anti-Western organization. This is China's goal, and it's also Russia's goal to create another pole that could challenge Western countries. And that's precisely why the rhetoric that Vladimir Putin frequently employs fits perfectly into the broader concept of those main countries, which also consistently utilize strong anti-Western narratives to significantly strengthen their own geopolitical influence and standing.
To promote the idea of a multipolar world, Beijing is readily making use of Moscow. Putin has long become Xi Jinping's junior partner, writes Deutsche Welle. The Russian economy relies on energy exports, and China is assigned the role of main buyer. Gazprom's chairman of the board, Alexei Miller, stated that the parties have signed a binding memorandum on the construction of the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline to China via Mongolia.
Although Vladimir Putin demonstratively stands next to Xi in Tianjin, the roles are clearly defined. Moscow is seeking protection. Beijing sets the terms. For Xi Jinping, this is a double victory. He uses Putin's weakness to strengthen his own leadership, while at the same time portraying China as an indispensable force in Eurasia. From a Deutsche Welle publication.
The project will allow the transit supply of 50 billion cubic meters of gas per year from Russia through Mongolia, according to the head of Gazprom. And the price of gas supplied to China will be lower than it was for European consumers before Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine. For years, China refused to build the Power of Siberia 2 gas pipeline, suggesting that Moscow pay for everything itself and set the gas price at around $60 per 1,000 cubic meters. Moscow did not agree. Even the trilateral negotiations between the leaders of Russia, China and Mongolia have taken place for the 7th time. The result was a memorandum, but whether any real steps will follow is unknown.
China is the kind of negotiator that knows how to secure its own interests, especially when dealing with a weaker partner. And here, Russia, in any case, has for many years now, and especially since 2022, become the weaker partner. Accordingly, China is getting the most favorable terms possible. Another matter is that overall, if we look at the dynamics of the relationship, China is not particularly eager to invest money in any long-term projects in Russia.
Neither the Chinese authorities nor the Chinese media have commented in any way on the agreement to build the gas pipeline. Journalists from Bloomberg and Reuters noted that the Russian wording sidesteps the key issues. It is unknown who will finance the project, including Soyuz Vostok, the transit gas pipeline through Mongolia, and the infrastructure within China itself. In Moscow, the memorandum was called a breakthrough. In reality, however, it is about selling gas at a reduced price and effectively acknowledging dependence on Beijing.
Sanctions have cut the Kremlin off from its main market. China is taking full advantage of this, dictating a low price, terms and deadlines, forcing Moscow to sign agreements that turn it into an appendage. As a result, Russia becomes completely dependent on Beijing's will. Meanwhile, China strengthens its geopolitical position by controlling yet another critically important lever. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Center for Countering Disinformation at the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, on Telegram.
The Wall Street Journal believes that the main problem with Power of Siberia 2 is Beijing's demand to purchase gas at Russia's domestic prices, which would reduce Moscow's revenues to a minimum. After losing the European market, Russia found itself in a vulnerable position. Meanwhile, China put the project on hold and waited for the Kremlin to agree to the imposed terms.
And what do you think? What is China planning with regard to Russia? We look forward to your comments. There's more to come. Stay tuned for the main news and don't forget to like. Wishing you peaceful skies above.